This is the College Football Connection Podcast with Alvin Reed, Bradford Bruns, and Marty Jenkins on 101 ESPN.
Minus 5 days until the showdown of the season. So far, that is, at Furrow Field. But fear not, ladies and gentlemen, we will be keeping tabs on all of that requisite math, simple math, though, at that, as this week continues. How's it going, everybody? Happy Monday afternoon to you out there in the STL and everywhere else. My name is Bradford Bruns. We are back. We are live in our headquarters, our studio space in Creve Coeur, Missouri, 101 ESPN, that YouTube channel, plus 101ESPN.com for the College Football Connection. Characterize this as your first look at Mizzou-Alabama, the titanic tussle that awaits this coming weekend at Memorial Stadium. 11 a.m. is the kickoff time. Lock it in, guys. SEC Nation is going to be in the house, and why wouldn't it be? Stemming from the events of the weekend, not only in relation, guys, to Alabama holding up its end of the bargain, but rather the topsy-turvy results taking place and manifesting themselves across the country. To wit, Missouri coming off of its bye week, now all the way up to number 14 in both of the major polls. The Crimson Tide, meanwhile, elevating as well to number 8 by virtue of vanquishing upstart Vanderbilt in that rematch round number 2 down there in Tuscaloosa. So what we want to do over the course of the next few days, bite-sized versions, if you will. We're going to put a bunch of different storylines under the proverbial microscope, okay? And we're going to start today, yes, we will, broaden the spectrum and the scope later on to talk about the key SEC picture at large. But today, I want to focus on the one positional group for Corey Batoon and Mizzou from a defensive standpoint that has been much maligned in recent weeks. And to be frank, it was the number one question mark entering the lofty expectations for 2025 altogether. That would be the secondary. And we understood that all the way back in week number 2. You were shredded in some different instances against the Kansas Jayhawks. However, a couple of weeks thereafter at Furrow Field, things became markedly worse against South Carolina. Now, we all know that Lenora Sellers, he's going to get his, even through the air, even despite some of the pitfalls he has encountered as he evolves to try to become that next level threat, potentially a number 1 pick in next April's draft. But to have allowed 302 yards through the air in week number 4, to follow that up with a couple of busts as well against UMass, suffice it to say that the head coach Eli Drinkwitz, Batoon, all members associated with that staff, definitely have some reservations and some reasons to be concerned entering this tussle with Alabama, because if you really consider the way in which the Crimson Tide offense has performed in the last couple of weeks alone, throw out what you saw, the completely discordant effort back in week number 1, you have to at this point, against Florida State, because that does not appear to be the same outfit right now that Kalen DeBoer actually has at his disposal. There were a lot of impressive signs, a lot of pros, a lot of positives in that matchup a couple of weeks ago against Georgia, knocking off the Bulldogs for the 10th time in the last 11 meetings, getting it done through the air, on the ground, and then to power up, to level up in a manner of speaking. That's precisely what we saw, especially in that second half at home against the Commodores. Ty Simpson, I said it from the very beginning of the season. I will confess, I was very much skeptical of this young man's ability to step in to replace Jalen Milroe and to offer really a comparable level of performance and productivity. He has definitely proceeded to prove me wrong at each and every turn. Somebody who hasn't even turned the football over for all intents and purposes. And not only now is he zeroing in on his number 1 threat through the air in Ryan Williams, the sensational sophomore, probably still the most lethal threat in the country at wide receiver, other than somebody, for Ohio State, named Jeremiah Smith. Now you're seeing other individuals get into the act. You're seeing Horton, who was actually the high man in last year's meeting versus Mizzou, that 34-0 beatdown in Tuscaloosa, and Bernard for that matter too. That established trio combined for 246 yards against Vanderbilt's overwhelmed secondary. Yeah, sounds pretty familiar, right? Just a couple of days ago, and that's why I do have major questions entering the contest on Saturday afternoon in mid-Missouri, because it's not just a matter of one go-to receiver you're trying to remove from the equation. Williams, he has his games in which he will go up and down. He has the ebbs and flows. But now, in also coupling that trio of wideout threats with an emerging, ever-burgeoning tight end threat as well, Alabama has a ton of different options to be able to utilize and deploy in this instance. And that's where the depth comes in for Missouri, okay, on the back end. Because as much as you love the defensive line, D-line Zoo, the guys with the motors up front, and heaven knows that Zion Young has done nothing but absolutely stampede through any and all comers in the last couple of weeks, you're also very effective when you're getting downhill at the linebacking spot as well. See Trotter as well as Rodriguez, more and more so with respect to the latter over the last couple of weeks. Now, though, not only do you have questions about the abilities of Stephen Hull, of Toriano Pride Jr. to stay in front of these formidable threats for the Crimson Tide, you have an injury situation as well. And it's entirely too early in the week. We haven't heard as of yet from the head coach, Eli Drinkwitz. You're not going to get anything in the way of an availability report until later in this week. But in this setting, guys, if a Dre Norwood is not available to you, if he is at anything less than 100%, frankly, and we know that he sustained some sort of soft tissue injury in that matchup versus the Gamecocks, then you really have a problem on your hands, because depth becomes an issue. It becomes being able to send a number of different bodies at all of these particular threats. And I entrust in that secondary to be able to hold up its end of the bargain with respect to the safeties. Okay, Burks Jr., he is the heavy hitter. He's not a liability per se coming over the top in coverage. And you know as well what you're getting from Carnell. And certainly Catalan had a season best performance in the previous contest against UMass. But Alabama could well have its ability to go down the field with a lot of frequency here. And let's just say that you established the running game pretty early too. Jam Miller, somebody who missed the better part of September due to injury. If Alabama is able to get on track with a balanced attack and really be able to command time of possession in the way in which it was able to do down the stretch versus Vanderbilt, then Missouri, despite right now being right there in the thick of things as far as the early line movement is concerned, could definitely have an uphill climb as we move into that second half and another sold-out venue there in Columbia. But much more, again, we are going to investigate. We are going to probe all sorts of different angles as we go along during the week on the College Football Connection, 101 ESPN, the YouTube channel, and 101ESPN.com. However, before we shut down shop for this bite-sized edition of the program here in Creve Coeur, we would be remiss if we didn't touch upon some other developments across the SEC. Back on Sunday, in case you had the opportunity to tune into our overtime presentation, we fixated more so on Big Ten country, because Penn State received the knockout blow. And when I say knockout blow, yeah, I'm referring to CFP aspirations for all intents and purposes as well. Simply put, to go down in that fashion to UCLA, I don't care that it was on the road. First time since 1985, the year of my birth, that a team with an 0-4 or worse record upended a top 10 team in the AP poll. We'll move beyond that, however, because a similarly bad loss was suffered by the University of Texas. Now 3-2, 2 losses for Arch Manning and company before you even get into mid-October. And needless to say, it's not exactly the path or trajectory. It's not exactly going to be much more favorable moving forward. This coming weekend, you've got the Red River rivalry or shootout, however you want to classify it, against OU, a still perfect, flawless Sooners team, even though John Mateer is not going to be at the controls for this one, recovering from surgery to fix a broken bone in his throwing hand. But Texas now finding itself in a world of hurt, having fallen, having succumbed to the Gators down in Gainesville. Yeah, it was 29-21. Yeah, you made the score more representative in the second half, but you were trailing almost as soon as you set foot in the swamp. 2 more interceptions for Arch Manning, and now to look at this team from that 50,000-foot view, per se, and to think that you have the 53rd best offense in the entire nation. Guys, I'm not thinking this is an upper half sort of offensive attack for Sark and company, but even the defense was exploited to such an extent by DJ Lagway over last weekend that I have no idea what the remainder of this campaign holds for that squad. But to think now that you have the top two teams from the initial preseason poll in Texas, in Penn State, having tumbled out of the top 25 entirely, both together for the first time since 2022, it is staggering, but it is also indicative of just how crazy this college football campaign has been through a mere 6 weeks on the schedule. And to underline that point, if you looked closely at the number of first-place votes received by the number one in the country right now, Ohio State, yeah, Ohio State ran roughshod over its last opponent. Ohio State has Illinois next on the schedule, but just 40 first-place votes. Well, that hasn't happened, that number, that minute of a number per se, since last year when you were talking about Alabama before the letdown against the Commodores that time around. Ohio State, though, at the top of the heap. Miami coming in at number 2 this late in a season. Highest ranking for the Hurricanes since all the way back in 2003. The ACC, though, the rest of it at least, a muddied picture if ever there were one, with Virginia actually surviving in overtime versus previously undefeated Louisville over the weekend. And then you have calamity regarding Florida State not being able to rebound in its particular tilt either. So a lot of questions yet to be answered, and certainly a lot of content yet to unveil for you throughout the rest of the week here on 101 ESPN, the YouTube channel. Hope you enjoyed checking in, though, for this edition of the program. My name is Bradford Bruns. We'll be back in a couple of days. Alvin will be back in the house with our customary picks as well as we enter the weekend. Have a great first start to your week. And until next time, St. Louis, take care. We'll catch you very soon.
Thanks for listening to the College Football Connection podcast on 101 ESPN.